There is an old version of the story that almost nobody in camp would want to hear beside a dying fire. It begins before Blackwater, before Coulter, before the snow and the Pinkertons and the last ride toward Beaver Hollow. It begins when Dutch van der Linde and Colm O'Driscoll were not enemies yet. More than men who tolerated each other for a job. More than outlaws who crossed paths and decided not to shoot. They were friends. Dangerous friends. Proud friends. Men who could laugh at the same fire and imagine that the world might be robbed clean if only the right kind of thieves stood together. In the story we know, their friendship curdles after Dutch kills Colm's brother, and Colm kills Annabelle in return. But in this darker trail, the first poison does not come from Colm. It does not come from Dutch either. It comes from the boy who loved Dutch too much to share him. That boy is Arthur Morgan, and the cruelest thing about this darker trail is that he does not begin as a monster. He begins as a scared, half-starved, angry young man who has already learned that the world takes whatever it can reach. Dutch finds him, or helps shape him, at an age when a person is still soft enough to be saved and hard enough to pretend he does not need saving. Hosea gives Arthur patience, tricks, a little humour, and maybe the idea that a lie can be cleaner than a bullet if used well. But Dutch gives Arthur something deeper and more dangerous. Dutch gives him a story in which his life finally means something. For a boy with no safe home left, that can feel like salvation. It can also become ownership. So the question is not whether Arthur could ever be secretly cruel. We already know he can be cruel. He breaks men for debts. He robs, threatens, kills, and spends years inside a gang that survives by taking. The better question is whether young Arthur, before wisdom, before sickness, before the final grace, could love someone so possessively that he mistakes fear for loyalty. Could he see Colm O'Driscoll standing beside Dutch, laughing with him, correcting him, challenging him, and feel not rivalry between gangs, but danger inside the family? Could he decide that if Dutch and Colm remain friends, then Arthur's place in Dutch's heart becomes smaller? That is where this alternate story begins to breathe. Picture Dutch and Colm in those earlier years, younger and less ruined. Dutch has the language, the ideals, the hungry shine of a man who can make a campfire feel like a parliament. Colm has a rougher kind of authority, colder, but not yet the empty cruelty he becomes later. He understands numbers, territory, and men who follow strength before they follow dreams. Dutch can make outlaws feel chosen. Colm can make them feel protected by size. Together, they are dangerous in a way neither fully understands. A poetic thief and a practical war chief, each admiring what the other lacks. Their friendship would not be gentle. Men like Dutch and Colm do not become friends by sitting politely and sharing childhood sorrows. They become friends through risk. A botched robbery that turns into laughter afterward. A posse outrun in rain. A bottle passed between them after a man almost dies. Colm making fun of Dutch's big words. Dutch mocking Colm's bluntness. Hosea watching both of them with narrowed eyes, amused and worried at the same time, because he can see what happens when pride recognizes itself across a fire. The friendship has warmth, but the warmth is made of gun oil, stolen money, and men pretending death has not frightened them. In this version, Annabelle becomes more than the woman Dutch loses. She becomes the human softness around which the whole disaster turns. Dutch loves her, and Colm respects the fact that Dutch loves her, perhaps even teases him for becoming less wild when she is near. Annabelle sees the friendship from another angle. She might understand that Dutch and Colm are not the same, that Colm's loyalty has harder edges, and Dutch's ideals have softer lies. She might warn Dutch that two proud men can stand side by side only until one of them needs to be first. Dutch, being Dutch, would smile and tell her she worries too much. Arthur would hear some of that. Young Arthur is always listening. He may not understand politics the way Hosea does, but he understands emotional weather. He knows when Dutch's attention moves. He knows when Hosea is holding back concern. He knows when a stranger's name is spoken with admiration, and Colm's name would begin to feel like a stone in Arthur's boot, not because Colm has hurt him yet, because Colm can reach Dutch as an equal. Arthur cannot. Arthur is son, student, weapon, rescued boy. Colm is brother, rival, partner, mirror. That difference would disturb Arthur before he has words for it. The secret villainy begins small, because the worst turns often do. A message from one camp to another delayed by a day. A joke repeated without the warmth it had when first spoken. A warning sharpened. Arthur hears Colm call Dutch dramatic after a job, and later tells Dutch that Colm thinks him foolish. Not exactly a lie, he tells himself. Colm did laugh. Colm did say Dutch loved a speech. Arthur simply removes the affection from the words. He learns, maybe from Hosea, without Hosea meaning to teach this lesson, that truth can be more dangerous when trimmed. At first, Arthur does not think of himself as plotting. He thinks of himself as protecting Dutch. Colm is too practical. Colm's men are too rough. Colm does not believe in the dream the way Dutch does. Colm will drag Dutch into common outlaw mud. Or worse, Colm will show Dutch that the dream is already mud with prettier names. Arthur feels the threat before he understands it. If Colm can make Dutch laugh at himself, if Colm can challenge him and still be embraced, then Dutch's world is not built around Arthur's loyalty. It is larger, older, and less dependent on the boy who needs it most. Hosea may sense the jealousy early. He would not call it villainy. He might call it boyish possessiveness, the kind that fades when a young man grows into himself. Hosea knows Arthur is wounded. He knows Dutch has become father, teacher, and son all at once. A person can be forgiven for standing too close to the only warmth he has. But Hosea also knows heat can warp wood. He might warn Arthur gently, telling him Dutch can have friends without loving Arthur less. Arthur would nod, embarrassed and defensive, and then carry the warning like an insult. The first real fracture comes through a job that almost works. Dutch and Colm plan it together. Perhaps a payroll wagon or a bank courier, moving through a stretch of country where both gangs have watchers. The job requires trust. Dutch's men cover one road. Colm's men cover another. Hosea handles the story that gets the target moving at the right time. Arthur is given a small part, not because he is unimportant, but because he is still young enough that older men do not explain every layer of the plan. That would be enough to sting him. He wants to be trusted with Dutch's life, not placed like a junior hand while Colm's brother receives the better route. Colm's brother, unnamed in the known story, becomes vital here precisely because canon leaves him open. Let us imagine him as a man who is not gentle, but not stupid either. He sees Arthur's resentment more clearly than Colm does. Maybe he laughs at it. Maybe he calls Arthur Dutch's pup, or says Dutch has taken in a stray that bites anyone who comes near the bowl. It is the kind of insult a grown outlaw might throw away in a moment, but to young Arthur it lands like prophecy. The brother has named the fear Arthur cannot bear, that he is a dog at Dutch's heel, not a son. The job goes wrong in a way that can be explained several ways. A law patrol appears too early. A signal is missed. Colm's brother moves before Dutch expected. Dutch's men think they have been exposed. Colm's men think they have been abandoned. Bullets enter a plan that was supposed to depend on timing. In the official version of this alternate history, everyone blames confusion, greed, and bad luck. In the hidden version, Arthur had shifted one piece. Not a huge betrayal, not a full confession-worthy sabotage. Perhaps he moved a marker. Perhaps he told one rider the wrong bend in the road. Perhaps he kept a warning to himself because he wanted Colm's side humbled. He did not mean for men to die, or so he tells himself afterward. He only meant to prove Colm could not be trusted with Dutch's future. That is how Arthur's secret villainy works best. He makes choices small enough to deny and large enough to matter. He lets the world do most of the violence. When the job goes wrong, he fights bravely. He protects Dutch. He drags a wounded man behind cover. He looks, from the outside, like the most loyal boy in the world. And because he does some brave things, he can hide from the cowardice inside, the one thing he did before the shooting began. This is important. Arthur does not become believable as a secret villain if he stops being brave. He becomes terrifying because bravery and deceit live in him at the same time. Dutch does not immediately blame Colm. Colm does not immediately blame Dutch. The friendship is strained but alive. They argue. They accuse each other of poor timing, bad men, loose tongues. Hosea tries to calm it. Annabelle tries to make Dutch see that pride is making every sentence worse. Colm's brother, angry and humiliated, says someone on Dutch's side changed the route. Arthur hears this and feels the first cold hand of exposure. The brother does not know for certain, but he suspects enough to watch Arthur differently. From then on, Arthur's fear becomes active. Before, he feared losing Dutch. Now he fears being seen. That is a darker engine. A jealous boy can outgrow jealousy. A guilty boy begins shaping the world to protect the first lie. Colm's brother becomes dangerous not because he is evil, but because he is near the truth. Arthur starts noticing where he rides, whom he talks to when he drinks, how much he says. He tells himself that Colm's brother will turn Dutch against him. He tells himself that if Dutch doubts him, everything Dutch saved in him will die. The lie becomes a living thing that demands food. The next stage is the planted rumour. Arthur knows Dutch's weak points better than almost anyone. He knows Dutch can tolerate criticism if it arrives as banter, but not if it smells like betrayal. He knows Dutch hates being handled by men who think him foolish. He knows Dutch needs loyalty to be visible. So Arthur lets a story reach Dutch that Colm's brother has been talking to outsiders, perhaps law, perhaps another crew, perhaps men who hate both gangs. The rumour is not pure invention. Colm's brother did talk to someone. Outlaws always talk to someone. Arthur only tilts the meaning until ordinary contact looks like treachery. Hosea might question it. He has learned from Dutch that sincerity can be theatrical, but he has also learned from Hosea that overacting spoils a con. He gives Hosea enough to leave room for doubt, and enough hurt to make pressing him feel cruel. Hosea does not believe fully. Dutch wants to believe enough. Colm, for his part, sees Dutch growing colder and does not understand why. That is the tragedy of the friendship in this version. The men are proud and flawed enough to be breakable without Arthur, but Arthur becomes the hidden hand that makes each flaw arrive at the worst time. Dutch reads Colm's bluntness as contempt. Colm reads Dutch's wounded grandeur as accusation. Hosea tries to translate, but translation fails when one person in the room benefits from misunderstanding. Arthur stands nearby, quiet, useful, loyal, and afraid. Annabelle becomes the one who almost stops it. She may see Arthur more clearly than Dutch does because she is not raising him. She is close enough to notice his hunger for approval, far enough to question it. She might ask him why he stiffens whenever Colm arrives. She might tell him Dutch has room in his heart for more than one bond. She might say it kindly, which would make it worse. A harsh person can be hated cleanly. A kind person who sees the truth becomes unbearable. Arthur's shame around Annabelle would be one of the saddest pieces of this alternate story, because she represents the version of the family that could have softened him. Arthur does not want Annabelle dead at first. That matters. A cheap version of this story would make him decide to remove her like a villain moving pieces from a board. The stronger version lets him resent her and love her in some buried way at the same time. Annabelle makes Dutch happy. That should make Arthur glad, but happiness changes Dutch. It makes him less hungry for the gang's adoration, less dependent on the role of savior, more capable of imagining a life with one person instead of a crowd. To young Arthur, that can feel like abandonment arriving in a beautiful dress. So Arthur's secret war has two fronts. Colm threatens Dutch as equal. Annabelle threatens Arthur as proof that Dutch could belong to someone else more gently. Neither deserves what follows. But Arthur is too young, too wounded, too proud, and too trained by outlaw logic to understand that love is not a territory. He begins treating Dutch's attention like land that must be defended. The death of Colm's brother should remain partly in Dutch's hands, because canon says Dutch killed him, and the tragedy is sharper if Arthur does not pull every trigger. Arthur engineers the conditions. He plants enough suspicion. He misdirects a message. He makes sure Dutch arrives at a place already primed for violence. Perhaps Colm's brother, trying to confront Arthur privately, is made to look like he is ambushing Dutch. Perhaps Arthur fires first from cover and lets the confusion make Dutch believe the brother tried to kill him. Or perhaps Dutch shoots in a tense standoff after Arthur claims the brother was selling them out. The exact mechanics matter less than the moral shape. Dutch kills him, but Arthur built the room. After the brother falls, everything becomes harder to stop. Dutch is shaken, but he can justify himself if he believes betrayal was near. Colm is devastated and enraged, and because he is Colm, grief turns quickly into retaliation. The friendship's body is still warm, but pride begins carving it into a feud. Arthur watches Dutch grieve the loss of a friend and feels horror mixed with relief. Colm will never stand beside Dutch the same way again. The threat is removed, but the cost is larger than Arthur expected, and the story is not finished collecting. Colm does not immediately kill Annabelle. Retaliation needs time to become a decision. There may be attempts at explanation first, ugly meetings where each side brings men and guns. Dutch insists Colm's brother betrayed them. Colm says Dutch has always needed to be adored and could not bear a man who laughed at him. Hosea tries to prove the rumour false or at least uncertain. Arthur keeps close to Dutch, saying little, letting Dutch's pain seek loyalty where doubt should have been. Annabelle pleads for peace, and that plea makes her visible as the thing Colm can take. Arthur could still stop it. That is the knife of the story. He sees signs. A message intercepted. A man riding near Annabelle's place. A warning from someone who does not know what it means. He understands Colm's grief is sharpening toward her, and he hesitates. The hesitation is his worst act. He tells himself warning Dutch might reveal too much. He tells himself Colm would never truly touch Annabelle, not after once calling Dutch brother. He tells himself there is still time. Under all that, another thought waits in the dark. If Annabelle is gone, Dutch will need the gang again. Dutch will need Arthur again. When Annabelle dies, Arthur's secret becomes unforgivable even to himself, though he will spend years avoiding that sentence. Colm kills her, or has her killed, in retaliation for his brother. Dutch is shattered. Hosea is horrified. The fragile bridge back to friendship burns completely. Colm becomes the man who murdered Dutch's love. Dutch becomes the man who murdered Colm's brother. The feud becomes doctrine. Nobody asks whether a young man in Dutch's camp carried messages wrong, trimmed facts, and let a woman walk into danger, because the answer has been buried under grief. This is where Arthur becomes the secret villain of the entire Dutch-Colm war. Not because he enjoys suffering, not because he wants Colm's men and Dutch's men to kill each other for years, but because he creates a lie too large to confess, and then spends his life defending the world that lie made. Every O'Driscoll killed later becomes easier to accept because the O'Driscolls are monsters. Every story of Colm's cruelty becomes proof that Arthur was right to fear him. Every time Dutch curses Colm's name, Arthur hears both punishment and protection. The feud becomes the wall between Arthur and the truth. Years pass, and the lie grows old enough to look like history. Arthur becomes the man we meet, broad, scarred, capable, loyal, dry, violent, strangely tender when he forgets to hide it. The gang knows him as Dutch's right hand, the one who gets things done, the one who grumbles and still goes. He is not outwardly a schemer. That is the brilliance of the secret. He no longer needs to scheme every day. The first scheme succeeded too well. The world now carries it for him. Dutch hates Colm. Colm hates Dutch. The gangs kill each other. Arthur can simply be loyal inside the reality he helped create. But the body remembers what the mouth does not confess. Arthur's hatred of O'Driscolls is too automatic, too useful, too clean. He can call them bastards and mean it, because many of them are brutal men. He can kill them without wondering what old lie put so many young fools under Colm's banner. He can look at Kieran Duffy tied to a tree and see not a frightened stable hand, but a shape his guilt requires him to despise. Kieran becomes dangerous to Arthur emotionally because he proves an O'Driscoll can be pathetic, human, and trapped. That complicates the wall. Kieran's presence would trouble this secret Arthur version more deeply than anyone knows. The camp treats Kieran as an enemy because that is what the feud demands. Arthur mocks him, threatens him, and withholds mercy longer than necessary. On the surface, this is normal gang hatred. Underneath, Arthur is defending an old story. If Kieran is simply an O'Driscoll, then cruelty toward him fits the world. If Kieran is a frightened man who ended up in the wrong gang because life is cruel and choices are narrow, then Arthur has to wonder how many other men died under a label that helped hide his original sin. The 6-point cabin raid becomes a quiet moral disturbance. Kieran saves Arthur by killing an O'Driscoll. In the known story, this begins Kieran's slow acceptance. In this hidden version, it also punctures Arthur's certainty. Kieran does the thing Arthur once failed to do. He chooses truth over the gang label placed on him. He risks himself to save a man who has treated him badly. Arthur can mock it, but he cannot fully dismiss it. Kieran, the supposed weakling, has made a clean choice under pressure. Arthur, the strong one, made a dirty choice years ago and called it loyalty. That is one of the best ways to make Arthur the secret villain without flattening him. The story keeps handing him mirrors he does not want. Kieran is one, Sadie is another. Jake Adler dies because O'Driscolls invade a home, and Arthur helps save Sadie from the wreckage. But if Arthur's old lie helped create the feud that helped shape Colm's gang into the thing it is, then Sadie's grief carries a distant echo of his first act. He did not send those men to Adler Ranch. He did not kill Jake, but the war he helped birth made O'Driscoll cruelty part of the weather. That is a terrible thing to understand later. The opening chapter in Coulter would therefore feel different under the surface. Arthur rides through snow believing he is helping his family survive. He fights O'Driscolls at Adler Ranch, sees Sadie's life destroyed, and feels righteous anger, but somewhere beneath that anger is a flicker he cannot name. The old feud has reached another innocent house. It has eaten people who never knew Annabelle or Colm's brother. Arthur can tell himself Colm made the O'Driscolls what they are. That is true, but truth can be incomplete enough to become another lie. Dutch's speeches about Colm would become unbearable if Arthur truly listened. Dutch frames the feud as proof of Colm's savagery and betrayal. He remembers Annabelle as sacred wound, and because she was truly murdered, his grief has power. Arthur does not doubt the grief. He doubts, or fears doubting, the clean beginning Dutch gives it. Every time Dutch says Colm started this, Arthur has to tighten some hidden muscle in himself. Dutch may not say those exact words, but the meaning hangs there. Colm killed what Dutch loved. Dutch's earlier killing of Colm's brother is explained as necessary, deserved, or swallowed by the larger memory. Arthur lets that imbalance stand, because correcting it would reveal the room he built. Hosea is the one most likely to suspect something, not the whole truth perhaps. Hosea is wise, but no one is omniscient. He may have noticed old inconsistencies, a message arriving too late, Arthur knowing something before he should, Colm's brother looking toward the boy in that final season with a strange accusation, Annabelle receiving no warning when warning might have been possible. Hosea might have asked himself questions and then chosen, for the sake of Dutch, Arthur, and the fragile family, not to dig too deep. That choice would haunt him too. In a story about secret villainy, silence spreads guilt. This makes Hosea and Arthur's relationship heavier. Hosea loves Arthur, and that love includes seeing the shadows in him. If Hosea suspects Arthur had some part in the old fracture, he might spend years trying to guide him away from becoming the worst version of himself. Not through direct accusation, because a direct accusation without proof could destroy the gang. Instead, Hosea teaches patience. He teaches restraint. He teases Arthur toward mercy when he can. He pushes him into scams instead of massacres. He tries, quietly, to make the boy who once chose a lie into a man who might one day choose truth. Arthur does not understand this fully. He may only sense that Hosea looks at him sometimes with sadness that is not ordinary disappointment. That look would irritate him. He would rather be scolded than mourned. A scolding can be answered. Mourning suggests something already lost. Hosea's grief for Arthur would be the grief of a man who knows a child can be saved from hunger and still grow around a hidden rot if nobody names it in time. Dutch, meanwhile, depends on Arthur in a way that makes confession almost impossible. By 1899, Arthur is more than a son. He is the proof that Dutch can raise loyalty. He is the strong arm of the dream, the man whose devotion makes Dutch's fatherhood feel real. If Arthur confessed that he helped create the Colm feud, Dutch would have to face Arthur's betrayal and his own failure to see the boy clearly. Dutch would rather die inside a speech than accept that. Arthur knows it. The secret protects Dutch's self-image as much as Arthur's. Micah Bell enters this hidden history like a curse with boots. Arthur hates him almost instantly, and the hatred makes sense even without the secret. Micah is cruel, racist, reckless, selfish, and poisonous. But in this alternate version, Arthur's hatred has an extra layer. Micah does openly what Arthur once did secretly. He isolates Dutch. He feeds Dutch's pride. He turns doubt into betrayal. He nudges men toward violence, while pretending he is only speaking hard truths. Arthur sees the shape. He has seen it from inside his own younger self. That recognition would make Arthur's disgust almost panicked. It is one thing to hate an evil man. It is another to see your own method without your old excuses. Micah does not love Dutch the way Arthur did. Micah does not act from fear of abandonment. Micah acts from appetite. But the tools are similar enough to sting. A trimmed truth, a whispered suspicion, a plan that benefits from confusion, a leader's insecurity turned into a weapon. Arthur may not consciously say, "He is me without love," but his soul would feel the comparison. This gives new meaning to Arthur's late-game conflict with Micah. He is fighting more than the rat who betrayed the gang. He is fighting the return of his own first sin in a more naked form. Micah becomes the proof that manipulation around Dutch always leads to blood, even when the manipulator claims loyalty. Young Arthur manipulated Dutch to keep him. Micah manipulates Dutch to use him. The motives differ, but the damage rhymes. Arthur's redemption requires him to break the pattern he began. Blessed Are the Peacemakers becomes especially rich in this version. Dutch meets Colm under the idea of a truce, and Arthur is captured. In the known story, Colm uses Arthur as bait, intending to trap Dutch. In the secret villain version, the mission becomes an echo of the old friendship's collapse. Dutch and Colm sit near each other again, older and hateful, speaking as if peace could be discussed while everyone knows the past has made peace almost obscene. Arthur watches from the hill, the man who once helped make that hatred permanent, and then Colm's men take him. Colm torturing Arthur becomes more than enemy cruelty. It becomes the past putting hands on the man who shaped it. Colm may not know Arthur's secret, or perhaps some part of him has always suspected the boy had more to do with the old fracture than anyone admitted. He might taunt Arthur about Dutch using him, about being a dog, about loyalty making fools of men. Those insults would land differently in this version, because they touch the original wound. Arthur does not merely suffer physically. He is forced back into the emotional shape of the boy who feared being discarded. Arthur's escape then becomes ambiguous. On one level, it is heroic survival. He cuts himself free, cauterizes the wound, fights through pain, rides back half dead. On another level, it is the secret refusing judgment. He survives the man whose life he helped ruin. He returns to camp and receives care, concern, and relief from the family built partly on his buried lie. The scene would be almost unbearable if told from inside Arthur's conscience. people are glad he is alive, he is glad too, but some part of him knows he has been spared again without confessing. The wound from Colm's torture could become a physical reminder of the old wound in history. Arthur carries scars all over him, but this one would feel different. It came from Colm's hands, or Colm's men, but the pain reaches back to the first betrayal. Every time it aches, it could remind him of the room where Dutch killed Colm's brother, the warning he did not give Annabelle, the way a feud can keep finding the body that began it. Arthur would bury the thought because Arthur is good at burying thoughts. But buried things in Red Dead have a habit of returning as weather. Colm's hanging in Saint Denis would be one of the most important scenes in the alternate telling. In the known story, Arthur, Dutch and Sadie attend the execution to ensure Colm's rescue plan fails. Sadie wants revenge. Dutch wants to see the enemy fall. Arthur is there because this is what the feud has demanded for years. In the secret villain version, Arthur watches Colm on the scaffold and sees more than an enemy. He sees the man who might have remained Dutch's friend if Arthur had not planted the first rot. Colm is still guilty. The story should keep that clear. Colm has led a brutal gang, ordered traps, used men, enabled killings, and helped make the world worse. He is not an innocent victim of Arthur alone, but tragedy deepens when guilt is shared unevenly. Colm became monstrous through his own choices, yet Arthur helped aim his life toward monstrosity. Watching him hang would not feel like justice to Arthur if he let himself think clearly. It would feel like the past being executed before it can testify. Sadie's presence complicates Arthur's guilt. She has every right to hate Colm. The O'Driscolls destroyed her home and killed Jake. Her rage is not theatrical. It is rooted in a real grave. Arthur would look at her and understand that confessing his old role would not comfort her. It might even insult her grief by stretching blame across too many years. Yet he would also know that the O'Driscoll machine that made Sadie a widow did not arise from nothing. The hanging gives her a piece of vengeance. It gives Arthur no peace. Dutch's reaction to Colm's hanging would also sting. Dutch might smile, sneer, or watch with grim satisfaction as an old enemy dies. In this alternate version, Arthur would see the boyish wound still alive in Dutch, the wound Arthur helped create and then use to keep Dutch close. Dutch thinks he is watching justice for Annabelle. Arthur is watching the final lock click on a secret. Colm dies without saying the truth because he may not know it fully. Dutch lives without hearing it. Arthur remains the only man holding the whole shape, and silence becomes heavier than confession. After Colm's death, the O'Driscolls do not vanish immediately. Hatred outlives leaders. This matters because Arthur's original sin cannot be solved by watching Colm hang. The men Colm gathered continue to harm people. Sadie's revenge continues. Hanging Dog Ranch remains. Violence has become institutional, not personal. Arthur may have wanted only to protect his place beside Dutch, but the result became a gang war with its own momentum. This is one of the story's hardest lessons. Private fear can become public history if acted on by someone close enough to power. Kieran's death becomes the punishment Arthur cannot dodge. In the known story, Kieran is captured by the O'Driscolls, tortured, killed, and sent back to the camp in one of the most horrifying scenes in the game. In this alternate version, his death strikes Arthur as something almost cosmic in its cruelty. Kieran had crossed the line Arthur never crossed. He had left one gang's label and tried to belong somewhere else honestly. He had saved Arthur, and the feud consumes him anyway. The dead boy on the horse becomes a message from the world Arthur helped create. No one who crosses these lines gets to be simple. Arthur's grief for Kieran would be sharper and more private than anyone understands. He may still say little. Arthur often says little when feeling too much. But inside, Kieran's death would reopen the old crime. The O'Driscolls mutilated him, yes. Colm's world did that, but Arthur's old lie helped turn Colm's world and Dutch's world into permanent enemies. Kieran dies because the feud demands bodies. Arthur once fed the feud and then spent years eating from the family table it protected. There is no clean way for him to grieve that. This hidden guilt would change Arthur's tuberculosis arc. In the original story, the illness strips away his illusions because death makes time honest. Here it also weakens the inner guards around the old secret. A healthy Arthur can keep working, joking, fighting, and pushing memory away. A sick Arthur has quieter hours. He wakes coughing. He rides slower. He spends more time alone with the journal. He notices birds, bones, weather, strangers, graves. The past enters through the cracks because the body no longer has strength to hold every door shut. The doctor in Saint Denis gives Arthur a factual sentence: tuberculosis. In this alternate version, that diagnosis does more than announce death. It tells Arthur the future is now too short for the old lie to remain useful. What is the point of protecting his place beside Dutch if he will not live long enough to occupy it? What is the point of hiding a childhood sin if the family it created is collapsing anyway? Illness does not make Arthur suddenly pure. It makes denial inefficient. He has less time for the lies that once seemed necessary. Sister Calderon or Reverend Swanson would become even more important depending on the path. Arthur's confession cannot be easy, because if he speaks the whole truth to the wrong person, it might only create more pain. He may never say, "I caused Dutch and Colm's war," in plain words, but he might say he has hurt people in ways no one knows. He might say some things started because he was scared and never stopped because he was a coward. He might say he is afraid that the best parts of his life were built over something rotten. A good confessor would not need every detail to hear the shape of the sin. The line about being afraid would land differently. Arthur is afraid of more than dying. He is afraid of judgment before death, not from law or God alone, but from the people whose love made him. He is afraid Dutch would hate him, Hosea would mourn him, Annabelle's memory would accuse him, and John would see him as another man who poisoned a family for selfish reasons. That fear keeps him silent longer than it should. But fear also helps him understand others differently. When he sees people trapped by shame, debt, grief, or loyalty, he recognizes the cage. The Downs family becomes part of his repair in a sharper way. Arthur cannot undo what he did to Thomas Downs, just as he cannot undo what he did to Dutch and Colm's friendship. But the Downs family gives him a smaller, immediate chance to act without waiting for forgiveness. Edith and Archie do not need his confession about Colm. They need help, money, distance, a chance. That becomes Arthur's new moral language. Not clearing his name, not explaining himself, reducing harm where his hands can still reach. John, Abigail, and Jack become the center of that new language because they represent the family that can still escape the pattern. Arthur once broke a possible brotherhood because he feared losing Dutch. Now he must help John break from Dutch, because staying will destroy him. The irony is heavy and beautiful. As a boy, Arthur secretly prevents Dutch from sharing power and affection with Colm. As a dying man, He openly pushes Dutch's son figure away from Dutch's control. His redemption is not merely saving John, it is reversing the first shape of his sin. Micah makes that reversal urgent. Micah's relationship with Dutch is not friendship in the old Dutch Colm sense. It is parasitic flattery. But to Arthur, it feels like the same emotional danger returning with a different face. Another man near Dutch's ear, another influence changing the family, another set of lies turning Dutch toward violence. Young Arthur responded to that fear by manipulating from the shadows. Dying Arthur must respond by telling the truth in the open. That is the moral hinge of the whole alternate path. This is why Arthur cannot simply kill Micah early and solve the story. If he did, the parallel would be too neat and too small. Arthur's true test is not whether he can remove a rival for Dutch's attention. He already did a version of that long ago, and it ruined lives. His true test is whether he can expose danger without becoming the hidden manipulator again. He must speak, warn, protect, and eventually choose John over Dutch's approval. He must stop treating Dutch's love as a treasure to guard and start treating human lives as more important than being loved by Dutch. The Guarma chapter, if it still happens in this alternate version, would be a fever dream of consequence. Dutch, stripped from the camp, far from Hosea, far from the old structures, reveals more of the man underneath. Arthur watches him kill, scheme, and harden. In the canon story, Guarma accelerates Dutch's collapse. In this version, Guarma also isolates Arthur with the man he once sinned to keep. That is almost cruelly poetic. Arthur wanted Dutch all to himself in the oldest emotional sense. Now, on an island of mud, chains, and revolution, he gets a version of Dutch without the family softened around him, and it is horrible. Arthur might think of Colm there, strangely, not fondly, not with forgiveness, but with a late recognition that Colm once served as a counterweight of another kind. Colm could laugh at Dutch. Colm could challenge him from equal ground. Colm could make Dutch less absolute because another proud man stood close enough to refuse worship. That friendship was dangerous, yes, but its destruction left Dutch more dependent on worshippers, sons, and flatterers. Arthur may realize he did not save Dutch from Colm. He helped remove one of the few people who could make Dutch feel human instead of prophetic. That realization would hurt, because it ruins Arthur's old justification. He told himself Colm was bad for Dutch. In many ways, Colm may have been. But a bad influence is not the same as a rival to be destroyed through lies. Dutch's friendship with Colm could have ended naturally, through disagreements, incompatible visions, or the inevitable pressure of outlaw life. Arthur made sure it ended through blood. That is the difference between sensing danger and becoming danger. When Arthur returns from Guarma and sees the camp's new shape, Micah's influence, Dutch's paranoia, and the fear around the fire, the old story becomes unbearable. He has seen this pattern before because he helped make it once. A relationship poisoned, a leader's pride fed, a rival turned into an enemy, a family taught to hate as proof of loyalty. The difference is that now Arthur is old enough to know what the pattern costs. Kieran is dead. Sadie is remade by grief. John is in danger. Abigail is desperate. Jack is watching. The time for secret control is over. The rescue of John from Sisika becomes the first open break. In the original story, Arthur and Sadie go against Dutch's wishes because leaving John to rot is wrong. In this alternate version, that act is also Arthur's rejection of the old jealous logic. Young Arthur might have been relieved when someone else threatened Dutch's attention. Dying Arthur risks Dutch's anger to bring John back. He chooses the brother he once might have envied. He chooses Abigail's need over Dutch's plan. He chooses a child's father over a leader's pride. It is a quiet reversal of everything he did wrong at the beginning. Dutch's anger after John's rescue would therefore wound Arthur differently. Dutch sees disobedience. Arthur hears the old threat: "If you do not protect my image, you are no son of mine." Once, that threat would have sent Arthur deeper into secret loyalty. Now it pushes him outward. He begins to understand that Dutch's love has always had conditions, even when those conditions were wrapped in warmth. This does not mean Dutch never loved him. It means Dutch's love could be weaponized by Dutch's need to remain central. Arthur's old sin grew in that soil. Hosea's absence after Saint Denis, if we keep Cannon there, becomes another punishment. The one man who might have helped Arthur confess, or at least understand, is gone. Hosea dies before Arthur can ask the question that matters: "Did you know what I did?" That unanswered question becomes part of Arthur's loneliness. He will never know whether Hosea suspected. He will never receive Hosea's judgment or mercy. The dead cannot correct him now. He has to act without being absolved. This is important, because a confession scene with Hosea might be satisfying but too easy. If Hosea hears everything and forgives him, the secret loses some of its weight. Better for Arthur to carry uncertainty. Maybe Hosea knew and loved him anyway. Maybe Hosea never knew and would have been horrified. Maybe both are true, in the strange way love sometimes sees and does not see at the same time. Arthur's redemption cannot depend on receiving the perfect response. It has to happen without one. The final confrontation with Dutch and Micah becomes the point where the old secret almost speaks. Arthur returns with the truth that Micah is the rat. In this alternate version, that truth is backed by a deeper personal horror. Arthur knows what hidden manipulation can do to Dutch and to a family. He knows the cost of letting a lie stand because it protects someone's place near power. So when Dutch hesitates, Arthur is fighting for more than John. He is fighting against the younger self who once let hesitation become Annabelle's death. He might almost confess then, not fully perhaps. There is gunfire, panic, accusation, Pinkertons closing in. But he might say something to Dutch that cuts too deep. Something like, "You always did listen to the wrong men when they told you what you wanted," or "I know what it means to poison you with loyalty." Dutch would not understand in the moment. Micah would mock it. John would be confused. But the words would carry the old truth under the new one. Arthur is telling Dutch that this has happened before and that Arthur himself was once part of it. Susan Grimshaw's role could shift as well. In canon, she stands with Arthur and is killed by Micah. In this alternate version, her death becomes another reflection of Annabelle, a woman tied to the old camp structure, killed in the chaos produced by men's pride and hidden treachery. Arthur would feel that, even if there is no time to process it. The secret villain of the past is now watching open villainy in the present kill another woman who held the family together in ways men underestimated. The repetition is brutal. The Pinkerton attack interrupts the standoff, and that matters. Red Dead rarely lets people finish their moral arguments indoors. The world crashes through the door. Bullets replace explanation. Arthur and John run. Dutch and Micah slip into their own fate. The old secret remains mostly unspoken, because history does not pause for confession. That is fitting. Arthur's life has been shaped by things unsaid. It would be too neat for the final camp to become a courtroom. Instead, truth arrives as action. Arthur helps John escape. Arthur's final choice between helping John and returning for the money becomes even heavier. Returning for the money can be read as revenge, practicality, or old obsession, depending on the path. In this alternate story, helping John is the clearest rejection of the first sin. Young Arthur sacrificed truth to keep Dutch. Dying Arthur sacrifices Dutch's approval, gang money, and personal vengeance to free John. He cannot save Annabelle. He cannot resurrect Colm's brother. He cannot unmake the O'Driscoll War. He can stop one more family from being swallowed by the need to belong to Dutch's dream. The mountain fight with Micah becomes a fight with the visible version of hidden corruption. Micah says what he is. He sneers, betrays, mocks, survives. Arthur, gasping and dying, is fighting a man who has none of the shame Arthur carried, but all of the manipulative instinct. That is why Arthur's victory cannot simply be killing Micah. He may not have the strength. The victory is that he no longer lies to keep his place. He has told the truth about Micah. He has chosen John. He has accepted Dutch's disappointment. He has broken the pattern, even if his body loses the fight. Dutch arriving during that final struggle is the last mirror. He sees Arthur and Micah, the son who became truthful too late, and the flatterer who became useful too long. In this alternate version, Dutch also unknowingly faces two kinds of betrayal. Micah betrayed him for survival and money. Arthur betrayed him years ago out of love twisted into fear. Dutch does not know that, and perhaps he never should. The scene works because Dutch cannot understand the full moral geometry. He only feels that something he built has collapsed beyond language. His speeches fail because the truth is larger than what he knows. Arthur could, in his last breaths, confess to Dutch. But should he? A full confession on the mountain would risk turning the ending away from John and toward old exposition. The stronger choice is quieter. Arthur may tell Dutch that he gave him all he had, and maybe that is true in the end, even if the beginning was poisoned. He may say Micah is the rat. He may say John made it. He may say nothing about Colm. The secret dies with him in spoken form, but not in moral form. His final action is the confession. He lets someone else have the family he once tried to keep for himself. The deer or wolf imagery becomes richer here. In a high honor path, Arthur's final visions suggest a soul moving toward peace despite a life of violence. In this alternate story, the deer does not mean innocence. It means direction. A deer can walk through a forest without owning it. It does not need to stand at the center of a campfire and be loved by everyone. Arthur's redemption is learning, too late, but not too late for John, that love is not possession. He cannot become innocent. He can stop clutching. If the path is darker, the wolf fits too. The wolf is hunger, survival, teeth, and loneliness. Secret villain Arthur has lived like a wolf under the skin of a loyal son, guarding territory he called family. Low honor would make the first sin echo louder. He might die still angry, still blaming, still reaching for money or revenge, never fully understanding that his oldest fear made him cruel. That version is bleak but coherent. The gentler reading can lean toward the higher path, because nighttime tragedy needs sorrow, with a little light at the end, but the shadow should be acknowledged. John's epilogue becomes the afterlife of Arthur's reversal. John does not know the full secret. He knows Arthur saved him. That is enough to shape his future. Abigail does not need to know Arthur helped create the Dutch-Colm feud to understand that he gave her family a chance. Jack inherits the benefit of a truth he never hears. That is one of the strangest mercies in this alternate version. Arthur's worst secret remains hidden, but his final repair is visible in the people who keep breathing. Colm's absence after the hanging also changes the epilogue through silence. He never learns the truth. He dies believing Dutch murdered his brother and deserved retaliation. He becomes a monster partly by his own choices and partly under the pressure of a lie he never saw clearly. That does not absolve him, but it makes his death sadder in retrospect. He and Dutch might never have remained friends forever. They were proud, violent men in a shrinking world, but they deserved to break by their own truths, not by a frightened boy's hidden hand. Dutch, by 1907, is a ruin moving through snow and money and old ghosts. If he ever learned the secret after Arthur's death, what would it do to him? Perhaps nothing useful. Dutch is very good at turning facts into shapes that protect him. He might say Arthur betrayed him, proving again that loyalty is a lie. He might say Colm was always poison, and Arthur merely saw it first. He might break for a moment, and then cover the break with another speech. The tragedy of Dutch is that truth often reaches him only after it can no longer save anyone. Micah, if he somehow learned before dying, would laugh. That is another reason Arthur would hate him. Micah would not be horrified, he would be delighted. He would call Arthur a hypocrite, a secret snake, a boy who did what needed doing and then grew a conscience when his lungs went bad. Micah's reading would be cruel and partly false, but not empty. That would be the final torment. The worst man in the story would understand one ugly part of Arthur better than the good people do. Arthur's redemption is refusing to let Micah's partial truth become the whole truth. Sadie would not need the old secret either. Her grief is already full. If she learned somehow, she might hate Arthur for a moment, then hate Colm, then hate the whole chain of men who turn fear into widows. But Arthur's final help to John would still matter to her. Red Dead's morality is rarely about clean accounting. People can owe the dead anger and gratitude in the same breath. Sadie knows this better than most, because her life after Jake is built from love and violence tangled together. Hosea's imagined knowledge remains the most haunting. Perhaps he suspected, perhaps not. If he did, his love for Arthur becomes tragic in the deepest way. He saw a boy capable of terrible hidden choices, and still tried to make a man out of him. He failed in some ways, succeeded in others. Arthur did become violent, loyal, guilty, and eventually good enough to spend his last strength on someone else. That is not a clean success, but it is not failure. Hosea's whole life sits in that grey space. Another layer rests even earlier than the broken job, in the ordinary afternoons before hatred becomes official. The most dangerous hours may not be the ones full of gunfire. They may be the ones where a person sits near a fire and realizes his place is not guaranteed. Arthur has spent much of his youth learning how to read threats from men with guns, knives, badges, debts, and hunger in their faces. Colm teaches him another kind of threat. Colm is dangerous because Dutch enjoys him. He can challenge Dutch without sounding like an enemy. He can laugh at Dutch without losing his attention. He can speak of robbery as trade rather than revolution, and somehow make Dutch listen. For Arthur, that is worse than insult. It suggests that Dutch's world contains rooms Arthur cannot enter. The friendship between Dutch and Colm would have had a rough shape, almost like two rivers meeting before they flood. Dutch carries language, romance, and the belief that crime can be made noble if wrapped in enough purpose. Colm carries numbers, territory, and the colder wisdom of men who know that ideals do not feed horses. Around them, younger men would feel the pull of a future that might become enormous. Not one camp hiding from lawmen, but a network of outlaws, informants, fences, guns, and safe houses moving through the edges of America like a shadow government. For Arthur, that possible future should be exciting. It means more protection, more money, more men watching the roads. But a boy does not always want what keeps everyone safe. Sometimes he wants what keeps him necessary. Dutch has taught Arthur to think of loyalty as a sacred bond, almost a blood relation chosen by will. If Colm becomes partner, brother, or rival equal, then Arthur's loyalty becomes one voice among many. The secret terror is simple and childish enough to be shameful. If Dutch has Colm, maybe Dutch needs Arthur less. That fear would never announce itself honestly. It would disguise itself as judgment, caution, instinct, and concern. A frightened heart loves costumes. Hosea would probably be the first to see that Arthur is changing around Colm. He might notice how Arthur grows stiff when Colm praises Dutch, or how Arthur interrupts when Colm tells a story that makes the camp laugh. Hosea understands jealousy because he understands people. He also understands that young men often confuse admiration with ownership. Still, even Hosea might underestimate the depth of it. Arthur is useful, dutiful, and often quiet. His anger usually has an object in front of it. A man like Hosea may watch for fistfights and open defiance, not for the soft rearranging of messages, timing, and tone. Arthur's danger is hidden partly because he is loved. There could be a night when Colm saves Dutch from embarrassment without making much of it. Maybe a negotiation turns sour in a back room. Maybe a fence tries to cheat them. Maybe Dutch, too proud to retreat, talks himself closer and closer to bloodshed. Colm sees the room differently and steps in with a joke that sounds like surrender until it becomes advantage. The tension loosens. Guns remain holstered. Money changes hands. Later, by the horses, Dutch laughs in that warm, delighted way Arthur has always wanted to earn. He claps Colm on the shoulder and says something like, "You may be a bastard, but you know men." Arthur hears the affection inside it and feels something small twist behind his ribs. A different boy might have taken that moment as a lesson. Arthur could have learned that Dutch can be helped by more than one person, that loyalty grows stronger when shared, that a family does not shrink because another chair is pulled close to the fire. But Arthur's life has not trained him to believe abundance is real. Loss has taught him that every kindness can vanish. Hunger has taught him that what is not defended will be taken. So instead of seeing Colm as a possible uncle, ally, or rough older brother, he begins to see him as a thief stealing warmth that once belonged to him. Colm's brother would notice this earlier than Colm. Brothers have a way of seeing the small disrespect aimed at each other, even when the target laughs it off. He might catch Arthur watching Colm with a face too calm to be innocent. He might call him Dutch's watchdog, or worse, Dutch's boy, because he knows exactly where to press. Arthur would hate that. The insult is not the word itself, but the truth inside it. He is Dutch's boy. He wants to be. He also wants everyone to treat that position as sacred instead of small. A brother's mocking smile can become a seed of violence if it falls into soil already bitter. Annabelle's presence makes the jealousy more complicated because she does not fit the clean enemy shape Arthur wants. Colm can be turned into a rival. Colm's brother can be turned into a sneering threat. Annabelle is harder. If she is kind to Arthur, his resentment has to hide from itself. If she calls him dear, asks whether he has eaten, notices a cut on his hand, or laughs at some dry thing he says under his breath, then she becomes a person rather than an obstacle. Young Arthur might resent Annabelle most on the nights she softens Dutch. Around the men, Dutch performs. He expands, declares, argues, predicts, condemns, and promises. Near Annabelle, some of that theatre may fall away. He may become quieter, more ordinary, more tired, more alive. Arthur, who has built his whole sense of purpose around Dutch as leader and rescuer, may not know what to do with Dutch as a man who can rest his head in someone's lap and stop performing greatness. It would feel like being excluded from a holy room. It might also frighten him, because an ordinary Dutch is harder to worship and harder to serve. That fear is one of the secret engines of this darker path. Arthur does not simply want Dutch alive. He wants Dutch in a form that justifies Arthur's life. Dutch must remain leader, father, prophet, and center of gravity. Colm threatens that by treating Dutch as equal. Annabelle threatens it by revealing Dutch as human. Hosea threatens it in a gentler way by seeing Dutch clearly and loving him without worship. Arthur is surrounded by people who might pull Dutch down from the pedestal. To a healthier soul, that would be mercy. To Arthur at that age, it feels like theft. The first real act of sabotage may be so small that Arthur barely recognizes it as sin. He might overhear that Colm plans to move a meeting by one day, because the law is thick near the road. Instead of carrying the warning straight to Dutch, Arthur waits. He tells himself he is checking the source. He tells himself Colm should have sent a better messenger. He tells himself Dutch has survived worse. By the time the message arrives, annoyance has already done its work. Dutch is made to feel slighted. Colm is made to look careless. Nobody dies. That is how the soul bargains at the start. No blood, so no crime. A second act might involve changing the emotional colour of a sentence. Colm says, Dutch has a silver tongue, but silver still bends. In the moment, it is a joke, around the wrong fire, repeated without the grin. It becomes contempt. Arthur does not need to invent an insult. He only removes the warmth that carried it. That kind of lie is especially poisonous, because the words are technically close to true. If challenged, Arthur can shrug and say he only repeated what he heard. The hidden villain often survives through half-truths, because half-truths let guilt hide inside accuracy. Dutch is vulnerable to this because he listens for betrayal the way some men listen for weather. His whole philosophy depends on trust, yet his pride makes trust fragile. He needs people to believe in him, and he suspects those who do not mirror that belief back cleanly enough. Arthur knows this long before he can name it. He knows which kinds of doubt Dutch can laugh off, and which kinds he stores away like loaded weapons. So Arthur does not need to convince Dutch that Colm is evil all at once. He only needs to teach Dutch's pride to flinch when Colm's name is spoken. Colm has his own weaknesses. He is not a patient saint ruined by Arthur alone. He leads hard men. He respects strength. He can smell disrespect and answer with cruelty. If Arthur makes Dutch colder, Colm will not respond by becoming gentle. He will become sharper, more mocking, more defensive. The friendship begins to cut both men because neither knows how to ask the simple question, who benefits from us distrusting each other? Pride keeps them from that question. Arthur's hidden hand works because the men he manipulates are already armed inside. There is a painful irony in Arthur learning this from Dutch himself. Dutch teaches through stories. He can turn a robbery into resistance, a camp into a movement, a wanted poster into proof that civilization fears free men. Young Arthur learns that facts do not move people by themselves. Facts need arrangement, they need music, they need timing. The secret villainy begins when Arthur uses Dutch's own lesson against Dutch's life. He becomes an editor of reality. He decides which details arrive first, which ones arrive late, and which ones are left in the dark until suspicion fills the empty space. Hosea, if he sees any of it, might try to pull Arthur back with gentleness. He might give him extra tasks away from Dutch, send him hunting, ask him to ride with someone else, or speak casually about how men grow into themselves by giving others room. Arthur would hear the advice and feel accused. That is another sign of guilt. Innocent jealousy can be embarrassed and laugh. Guilty jealousy hears wisdom as threat. Arthur may begin avoiding Hosea's eyes, or answering too quickly, or making himself busier than necessary whenever Hosea comes near. The boy who wants to be seen by Dutch begins fearing that Hosea sees too much. The possible alliance between the gangs would have changed everything. Dutch's people are smaller, stranger, more familial, stitched together by loyalty and need. Colm's men are broader, rougher, easier to replace, more like an outlaw machine than a home. A lasting friendship between Dutch and Colm might have forced each side to learn from the other. Dutch's gang might have become more practical, Colm's might have become less empty. The O'Driscoll boys could have been more than disposable men dying in fields. The Van der Linde gang could have been less dependent on Dutch's mood. That possible future is exactly what Arthur, without meaning to understand it, helps destroy. If that future had lived, Arthur might have become a different man. Colm would not have fathered him, but he might have challenged him in ways Dutch would not. He might have mocked Arthur's sulking, until Arthur learned to laugh at himself. He might have taught him the cold trade of outlaw survival, without pretending it was holy. A rough lesson can save a young man if it arrives before pride hardens. Instead, Arthur turns the man who might have complicated him into a monster simple enough to hate. That is one of the great sadnesses of the premise. Arthur may destroy the very person who could have loosened Dutch's spell over him. Annabelle might have been another path. If she lived, Dutch's dream may have had to share space with domestic tenderness. That does not mean Dutch would have become good, calm, or ordinary. But love can interrupt performance. A woman who knows where a man's speeches end and his fear begins can sometimes keep him from floating too far above the ground. Arthur, threatened by that softness, helps create the conditions for her death, and in doing so, leaves Dutch more exposed to his own worst weather. Years later, when Molly O'Shea aches under Dutch's neglect, the echo would be terrible. Dutch has lost the woman who knew him better, and Arthur helped make that loss permanent. The murder of Colm's brother would also change Arthur's relationship with masculine pride. In the known tale, Dutch kills him and Colm retaliates. In this hidden version, Arthur has fed the misunderstanding that makes the killing feel necessary. That means every later boast about killing O'Driscolls carries an old contamination. Arthur can still be brave. He can still defend the camp, but part of his bravery is guarding a buried crime. Each O'Driscoll he shoots is both an enemy and a witness removed from a world that might someday ask different questions. Somewhere between the old feud and 1899, Arthur would learn to live beside the secret by making himself useful. Work is one of his ways of avoiding thought. He hunts, collects debts, breaks horses, rides ahead, guards wagons, carries sacks, drags men from danger, and puts his body between the gang and harm. Usefulness becomes penance without confession. The problem is that usefulness can become another hiding place. If everyone needs him, no one has time to ask what he once did. If he bleeds enough for the family, maybe the family will never notice the blood he helped spill before. Dutch benefits from Arthur's usefulness too much to question it deeply. A leader with a loyal enforcer can mistake obedience for truth. Arthur's silence becomes part of Dutch's comfort. When Arthur agrees, Dutch feels confirmed. When Arthur doubts, Dutch feels betrayed, because the bond has been built too intensely. This is why the old secret matters beyond Colm. It helps explain the later collapse of father and son. Their relationship was never clean. It was made from rescue, worship, violence, guilt, and need. A love that intense can carry tenderness, but it can also rot under pressure. By the time the gang reaches the mountains after Blackwater, the secret is old enough to feel like bone. Arthur may not think about Dutch and Colm's lost friendship every day. He may not wake each morning remembering the first delayed message or the first rumour. People are capable of burying themselves from themselves. But the shape of the secret remains inside his reactions. The O'Driscoll name still gives him a clean outlet for old shame. Dutch's hatred still tells him the lie survived. Annabelle's absence still sits behind Dutch like a missing chair no one mentions. Coulter, then, becomes more than a survival chapter. Snow covers tracks, bodies, mistakes, and old roads. The gang is half frozen, hungry, and afraid, and the first enemy shape that emerges from the whiteness is O'Driscoll. That matters. Arthur's past is not waiting in a warm room where it can be reasoned with. It comes through a blizzard, armed and desperate, wearing the same name he has used for years to keep the old story simple. When Arthur fights them in the snow, he can tell himself nothing has changed. They are still the enemy. But beneath that certainty, the first buried cause is riding with him. The Adler Ranch becomes a nightmare of consequence. Sadie is found in the wreckage of a violence that belongs to the feud's long afterlife. Jake is dead. The house burns. A marriage is broken by men carrying the O'Driscoll name. Men who may never have known Colm's brother, Annabelle, or the old friendship. That is how manufactured hatred spreads. It outlives the original insult, recruits strangers, and reaches homes far from the first lie. Arthur helps pull Sadie from that ruin, but a deeper version of him might feel something more than pity. He might feel the sick recognition that rescue does not separate him from the chain that brought her there. Sadie herself becomes a living answer to Arthur's self-deception. She does not turn grief into secrecy. She turns it outward, dangerously, messily, honestly. Her rage is not always wise, but it is named. Arthur's old rage was unnamed, then disguised. Watching Sadie become a force after loss might make him remember Annabelle in ways he avoids. Annabelle did not get to become a gunslinger. She did not get a long revenge arc. She became a memory used by men to justify more killing. Sadie, by surviving, refuses to remain only a symbol. That difference would unsettle Arthur more than he could explain. Horseshoe Overlook, with all its warmth, would carry a strange pressure over the secret. People sing, gamble, mend clothes, cook, complain, and tell stories while the land opens green around them. If Arthur is carrying the old truth, this peace becomes both comfort and accusation. He once helped destroy a possible peace between two camps. Now he lives inside another fragile peace and calls it home. Every laugh around the fire proves that fellowship can exist. Every argument proves how easily it can be spoiled. Kieran's arrival at Horseshoe turns the old lie into a human face tied to a tree. At first, Arthur can keep the old category intact. O'Driscoll, enemy, threat, information source. But Kieran is too frightened, too awkward, too plainly human to remain a symbol forever. His fear exposes the poverty of the feud's language. If every O'Driscoll is a monster, what is this trembling man who knows horses better than hatred? Arthur can mock him, threaten him, and keep distance, but Kieran's continued presence quietly argues against the story Arthur has needed for years. The moment Kieran saves Arthur's life carries a moral force that goes beyond gratitude. An O'Driscoll hand prevents Arthur from dying. That single act breaks the neat circle of old blame. The name Arthur has used as a wall suddenly has a door in it. He does not walk through easily. Arthur rarely changes because someone gives him a lesson wrapped in kindness. He changes because reality keeps pressing against the stories that made violence comfortable. Kieran becomes one of those pressures, small and persistent, like water finding a crack. Valentine adds another kind of mirror because it is full of ordinary ugliness. Mud, livestock, drunks, lawmen, debtors, shopkeepers, and tired people, all moving through a town that is neither noble nor damned. Sometimes it is a man stepping around a truth because he wants the day to go his way. Valentine, with its churned streets and practical hunger, reminds us that history is made as much by small selfish adjustments as by great speeches. Thomas Downs matters even more under this reading. Arthur's cruelty at the Downs Ranch is usually one of the wounds that begins his later awakening, because it gives Harm a coughing body and a family name. In the secret villain version, Thomas Downs becomes the second intimate ruin Arthur cannot talk his way around. Once again, Arthur's actions reach a family. Once again, a man weaker than him is pressed until consequences spread beyond the moment. The difference is that the Downs harm is visible enough to shame him. The old Colm Dutch harm has stayed hidden so long that shame had to become part of his skeleton. Mary Linton also takes on a quieter role. She represents a path Arthur could imagine but never inhabit honestly. If he is carrying this old secret, then his sense of being unfit for Mary is about more than robbery, poverty, and violence. It is about the belief that the best parts of him were compromised long ago. Mary sees tenderness in him, and that almost hurts worse than condemnation. To be loved by someone good when you know what you have hidden can feel like standing in sunlight with blood under your cuff. Arthur may push her away partly because her hope threatens the identity he uses to contain guilt. The feud between the Greys and Braithwaites in Rhodes becomes one of the clearest reflections. Two old families, two old stories, two inherited hatreds, both sides convinced the other began it, both sides using the past as permission to continue. Dutch and Hosea think they can exploit that feud from the outside. But in this alternate reading, Arthur is already living inside a feud he helped distort. The Rhodes chapter is not merely a con gone wrong, it is history teaching the same lesson in louder colours. Once hatred becomes family property, nobody needs the first truth anymore. They only need the next excuse. Sean's death in Rhodes would cut into that lesson. A young man full of noise and life is suddenly gone because the gang thought it could move through other people's inherited violence without paying. Arthur has seen inherited violence before. He helped create one version of it. Sean's body in the street becomes another answer to the illusion that old grudges can be handled from a distance. They catch everyone near them. They do not ask whether the person dying understood the original cause. They only require proximity. Jack's kidnapping by the Braithwaites deepens the same pattern. The child pays for adult schemes. That is one of the cruelest laws in Red Dead's world. Jack has no part in Dutch's pride, Hosea's con, Arthur's violence, or the Braithwaites' resentment, yet he is carried away because adults keep turning each other into pieces on a board. Annabelle and Colm's brother were not children, but their deaths created the same kind of inheritance. People who come later are forced to live inside stories they did not write. Arthur's final desire to save Jack's future grows more powerful if he once helped poison the past. Clemen's Point, with its water and warm evenings, might look peaceful on the surface, but it is surrounded by old blood. That setting suits secret villain Arthur because he is also calm on the surface, while old violence moves underneath. He can fish with Jack, talk with Hosea, ride with Dutch, and still carry the hidden knowledge that some disasters begin before anyone hears thunder. The lake reflects faces without showing what they have done. Arthur's journal may catch more truth than his mouth during this period, though even there he might draw around the wound rather than name it. Arthur's journal is important because it is the one place where he practices honesty before he can live it. He sketches animals, people, rooms, graves, and strange little details because looking carefully is safer than confessing directly. In this alternate path, the journal might contain repeated O'Driscoll images he does not understand. A half-drawn gallows, a woman's hand near a fire, a brother's face scratched out, Dutch standing beside a man whose hat is left unfinished. The page would become a place where the secret leaks sideways. Arthur may not write, "I caused this," but the pressure of it might appear in the things he cannot stop drawing. Saint-Denis makes the hidden villainy feel small and massive at the same time. The city is too large to care about Arthur's private guilt. Streetcars move, factories breathe smoke, rich men dine, poor men sleep in corners. And the law has offices instead of campfire rumours. In a place like that, the old feud between Dutch and Colm seems almost provincial, a country wound brought into modern streets. Yet Saint-Denis also proves that small private sins can feed larger systems. Angelo Bronte, the police, the Pinkertons, and the wealthy all understand how to use old desperation. Arthur is not outside that machinery. He has been part of it in miniature. Bronte would fascinate and disgust Dutch, partly because Bronte is what power looks like when it stops needing romance. Colm may have been Dutch's rough equal in the wilderness, but Bronte is a city version of corruption. Perfumed, networked, protected. Arthur, carrying the old secret, might sense that Dutch is vulnerable to any man who reflects a possible self back at him. Colm reflected practical outlaw power. Bronte reflects urban command. Micah reflects unashamed domination. Dutch keeps meeting mirrors, and Arthur keeps watching him respond with pride. The old sabotage worked because Dutch has always been too interested in his own reflection. The failed bank robbery and Hosea's death tear away the person most capable of interpreting Arthur with mercy. Hosea's death is public, brutal, and theatrical in a way that makes private confession feel suddenly useless. If Hosea had known part of the old truth, then his death also removes the only living witness who might have helped Arthur turn guilt into speech. If Hosea did not know, the loss is still devastating, because Arthur loses the man who might have believed he could be better after hearing the worst. That possibility dies on the street with him. Lenny's death adds another layer, because Lenny represents a future with intelligence, humor, and courage that the world never lets fully open. Arthur likes him, respects him, and perhaps sees in him a younger man not yet ruined by old secrets. When Lenny falls, Arthur has no time to grieve properly. The body is left in the rush of escape, another unfinished life swallowed by Dutch's collapsing dream. Secret villain Arthur would feel the pattern tightening. His old manipulation helped preserve Dutch as center. Now that center is dragging promising people into disaster. The bargain has become unbearable. Guarma strips the story of familiar excuses. There is no cozy camp, no old map of grievances, no Annabelle spoken of by a fire, no O'Driscoll enemy to simplify the moral field. There is heat, captivity, rebellion, and Dutch becoming stranger under pressure. Arthur watches him kill, scheme, and unravel far from the mythology of American freedom. The distance matters. Sometimes a person sees the truth of home only after being thrown into an alien shore. Arthur may realize that Dutch's danger was never created by Colm, Bronte, Cornwall, or Micah. They all drew it out, but the seed was already there. That realization does not free Arthur from blame. It makes blame more complex. If Dutch was always capable of this, then Arthur did not create Dutch's pride. But he did protect it, feed it, and weaponize it when he was young. He helped remove people who might have challenged Dutch in different ways. He helped turn Dutch's emotional world into a narrower room. People are still alive, but the old warmth has thinned. Molly's desperation, Dutch's suspicion, Micah's confidence, Abigail's fear, and John's absence all gather in the air. Arthur, now ill and carrying hidden history, moves through that atmosphere like a man hearing two songs at once. One song is the immediate collapse, the other is the older melody of Dutch and Colm, the first friendship he helped sour. Both songs share the same notes: pride, fear, possession, silence, blood. Molly's death would strike this version of Arthur in a place he might not expect. She claims betrayal while drunk and broken, then dies for words that turn out not to be true. The camp accepts a simple story too quickly because it needs an object for fear. That is exactly how Arthur's old manipulation worked. A claim becomes useful before it becomes proven. A person is reduced to a role. The truth arrives too late to save the body. Molly and Annabelle are very different women, but both are caught in the space where Dutch's love, pride, and suspicion become lethal. Susan Grimshaw killing Molly also complicates the later moment when Susan stands with Arthur. Susan is discipline, survival, and hard care. She can be wrong in one scene and brave in another. That moral mixture suits the world Arthur inhabits. People do terrible things for reasons that resemble loyalty. Arthur knows that better than anyone. If he judges Susan too cleanly, he risks seeing himself. If he forgives her too easily, he risks excusing the very machinery that once protected his own lie. The camp is full of people doing harm in the name of keeping a family from breaking. Rain's Fall offers Arthur a different kind of masculinity at the exact time he needs it. The chief's patience is not weakness, his restraint is not cowardice. He understands grief without needing to turn every wound into retaliation. For secret villain Arthur, this is almost unbearable, because Rain's Fall represents the road he never took. When Colm's brother died, restraint was possible somewhere in the chain. When Annabelle was threatened, warning was possible. When the feud hardened, truth was possible. Rain's Fall shows that sorrow can remain sorrow instead of becoming inheritance. Arthur cannot undo his old failure, but he can recognize another shape of strength. Eagle Flies, by contrast, shows how easily justified anger can be used by a man like Dutch. Dutch does not create Eagle Flies pain. That pain is real, rooted in theft, betrayal and cruelty far larger than the gang. But Dutch uses it. Secret villain Arthur should feel the horror of that because he too once used real pain. He used Dutch's fear of betrayal, Colm's pride, Annabelle's position, and a brother's temper. Manipulation often begins by touching something true. That is what makes it effective and damning. The army conflict also widens the moral frame. Arthur's old sin belongs to a small outlaw world, but the larger country is built from grander versions of the same habit. Take a story, bend it toward power, call the victims dangerous, then treat violence as order. Dutch speaks against civilization, while copying its methods inside the camp. Arthur, seeing this late, may understand that his private lie was one small branch of a much older tree. That does not absolve him. It means his redemption must become concrete. He cannot repair history in speeches. He can only choose differently where his hands can still reach. Jon's imprisonment becomes the point where choosing differently finally costs him his place. If Arthur once manipulated events to keep Dutch close, rescuing Jon without Dutch's blessing is the reverse motion. He risks Dutch's anger to save someone else from being abandoned. That is why the Sisika rescue matters so much here. Arthur is no longer editing reality to preserve his position. He is acting against the story Dutch wants to tell. Dutch says wait. Arthur hears death inside that word and refuses it. For once, he lets loyalty move outward instead of inward. Sadie riding with Arthur to save Jon creates a quiet balance. Sadie's life was shattered by O'Driscoll violence, a violence tied in this alternate chain to Arthur's oldest secret. Yet here she becomes his partner in saving a man from Dutch's neglect. She does not know the hidden history, and she does not need to know. The moral world does not always give us neat confession before repair. Sometimes a person harmed by the long shadow of your choices stands beside you in a later act of courage, and the only decent thing is to ride well. Abigail's fear sharpens Arthur's transformation because it is so practical. She does not need Dutch's mythology. She needs Jon alive, Jack safe, and a future where the boy is not trained to worship men who get families killed. Abigail's clarity cuts through the fog that held Arthur for years. If young Arthur's secret villainy came from wanting to be the irreplaceable son, then Abigail's demand is the opposite. Let the child escape the need for fathers like Dutch. Let Jack inherit something other than loyalty twisted into violence. Jack himself is the innocent measure of the whole alternate story. He hears names, songs, jokes, and warnings long before he understands them. Children live inside adult legends before they can test them. Arthur once lived inside Dutch's legend that way, and then protected it with a frightened boy's cruelty. Saving Jack becomes a way of breaking that inheritance. Arthur cannot save the child he used to be. He cannot save Isaac, whose death already haunts him, but he can help save this boy from becoming another man shaped by the camp's old hunger. Beaver Hollow is the right final camp for secret villain Arthur, because it feels like a cave where hidden things come to rot in the open. The air is damp, the light is poor, and the old family has become suspicious clusters of survivors. Dutch's voice still rises, but the space no longer believes him. Micah moves too freely. Bill and Javier drift toward the wrong side out of fear, pride, confusion, and habit. Arthur, dying and guilty, sees the shape of the gang as something he once helped make possible. A family where truth was always second to the leader's need. Micah's genius, if that ugly word can be used for him, is that he understands Dutch does not need honest counsel. He needs emotional permission. Micah gives him permission to abandon people and call it strategy, to kill and call it strength, to suspect and call it vision. Young Arthur once gave Dutch a different kind of permission. Permission to see Colm's challenge as betrayal. Permission to treat wounded pride as evidence. That parallel is why Micah disgusts him at a spiritual level. Arthur is not looking at a stranger. He is looking at a method he once used, stripped of love and shame. Bill and Javier become tragic in another direction. They are not secret architects. They are men caught in the weather of stronger personalities. Bill wants belonging and recognition. Javier wants loyalty to mean something stable. In a gang whose history has been warped by hidden manipulation, men like that become easy to pull toward the loudest certainty. Arthur may feel anger at them near the end, but also sorrow. A lie told early enough becomes the ground other people stand on. When the ground cracks, they do not always know where to step. Charles Smith would sense something wrong without needing the full story. Charles is careful with violence. He understands when killing is survival and when it becomes appetite. Around Arthur, he often sees both danger and decency. In this alternate reading, Charles might feel the contradiction more clearly than most. Arthur can be gentle with a horse, respectful toward the dead, protective toward the weak, and still carry a hidden wound that helped poison years of bloodshed. Charles would not need a confession to understand that a man can be divided against himself. Tilly and Mary Beth represent another kind of witness, people who survive by noticing tone, mood, and danger before men announce it. They may not know Arthur's secret, but they know when camp stories are too polished. They know that men in power often explain pain in ways that protect themselves. Their presence matters because the family is never only Dutch, Arthur, Hosea, Micah, and John. The women carry memory too. A secret can remain officially buried while still being felt in the nervous systems of everyone who has learned to read a room. Pearson, Uncle, Reverend Swanson, and the quieter camp figures add ordinary life around the tragedy. That ordinariness is important. A secret villain does not spend every hour plotting beside a candle. He eats stew, complains about weather, loses at cards, laughs despite himself, and fetches supplies. Evil can hide inside routine because routine makes people believable. Arthur's hidden guilt works best when surrounded by chores. The more human he remains, the more painful the truth becomes. A monster is easy to reject. A flawed man who can still be kind is much harder to place. The question of whether Arthur should confess to anyone remains delicate. Confession can be selfish if it only transfers pain from the guilty to the grieving. Telling Dutch might break nothing useful because Dutch would turn the truth into another performance. Telling Sadie might burden a woman already carrying enough dead. Telling John might poison the one relationship Arthur most needs to leave clean. Telling a priest or sister might ease Arthur, but it would not repair the lives broken by the feud. Silence is not noble by itself, yet speech is not automatically healing. That is why Arthur's best confession may be behavioral. He tells the truth where the living can still be saved. He names Micah. He frees John. He helps Abigail. He gives money away. He stops defending Dutch's story. He does not need to gather everyone around and explain the old crime in perfect detail for the moral reversal to matter. The hidden sin was manipulation, silence, and possession. The answer must be clarity, sacrifice, and release. A confession spoken too late might become theatre. A life spent in the opposite direction, even briefly, becomes harder and more honest. Still, there might be one private moment when Arthur almost says it. Perhaps after speaking with Sister Calderon, he sits alone and starts to write Annabelle's name. He pauses because even the name feels stolen. Then Colm's brother, whose name history does not preserve, comes to mind as a shape rather than a sentence. Arthur might write that he once thought love meant keeping the fire small enough to warm only him. He might scratch that out because it sounds too pretty for what happened. He might write nothing for a while. The page stays open. The lantern burns low. The silence becomes its own witness. The beauty of keeping the confession incomplete is that it respects Arthur's character. He is not a man who easily turns inward truth into polished speech. His deepest feelings often come out sideways, through a joke, a drawing, a rough kindness, or a refusal to leave someone behind. A full, elegant confession might sound too clean for him. A broken one, half-written and never shown, feels closer to the man. He can face a gun more easily than a sentence that begins with, "I was afraid." Fear is the heart of the whole alternate tragedy. Young Arthur's fear is not cowardice in the ordinary sense. He is brave with pain, danger, and death. His fear is emotional homelessness. He cannot bear the idea that Dutch's love might become less necessary or less exclusive. That fear turns intelligence into poison. He learns where to press, when to wait, what to omit. The secret villain is not the man without fear. He is the man who lets fear make decisions while loyalty provides the disguise. Dutch's fear answers Arthur's fear. Dutch fears insignificance, doubt, and the possibility that he is merely another criminal with better language. Colm's friendship threatens him because Colm can admire him without submitting. Annabelle's love threatens him because real intimacy sees weakness. Hosea's counsel threatens him because wisdom often sounds like limitation. Micah later comforts him because Micah asks for so little truth. Arthur's early manipulation works because it meets Dutch's fear with false evidence. A lie finds the wound it knows how to enter. Colm's fear has a different shape. He fears being made a fool, being weakened, being seen as less dangerous than his reputation. When his brother dies, grief and pride knot together until retaliation feels like restoration. If he kills Annabelle, he is not restoring anything. He is spreading the emptiness. But men like Colm often mistake returned pain for balance. Arthur's hidden role does not excuse Colm's choice. It shows how easily one man's secret fear can wake another man's public cruelty. Annabelle, though absent from the main events, becomes the moral centre because she is the person everyone turns into meaning after death. Dutch turns her into proof of Colm's evil. Colm turns her death into answer for his brother's blood. Arthur turns her into the silence he cannot approach. The danger of becoming a symbol is that the living stop asking who you were. A richer version of the tale should let Annabelle remain specific, even if details are imagined. A voice, a temper, a kindness, a way of seeing through Dutch, a life larger than the wound men made from her. Colm's brother deserves the same respect. Canon leaves him mostly as the dead brother who starts the chain. In this alternate version, he should not be a faceless tool. Maybe he was cruel. Maybe he loved Colm. Maybe he saw Arthur's jealousy because he had his own. Maybe he was the kind of man who made jokes too sharp and apologies too rare. His death matters because unnamed people often carry named consequences. The feud remembers Annabelle because Dutch loved her. It remembers Colm's brother because Colm avenged him. But the world outside their grief may never ask who he was when he was alive. The old friendship between Dutch and Colm should remain believable rather than sentimental. They were not gentle reformers who might have built a peaceful commune if Arthur had behaved. They were criminals. Their bond was born in risk, ego, and usefulness. Even if Arthur had never interfered, it might have broken under money, pride, or a bad day with too many guns. That uncertainty makes the story stronger. Arthur is not the sole creator of evil. He is the hidden hand that turns a crack into a split. Tragedy rarely needs one cause when many are waiting. Blackwater can be folded into this pattern without making Arthur the cause of every disaster. By 1899, Micah pushes Dutch toward the ferry job, and Arthur's old methods return through another man. Blackwater is not Arthur's secret crime, but it happens in a moral atmosphere Arthur helped normalize long ago. Dutch, listening to the voice that flatters danger, doubt being dismissed, caution treated as weakness, the group pulled by one man's need to prove destiny. Arthur's unease after Blackwater may therefore carry an older echo. He has seen what happens when Dutch chooses the story that protects his pride. The money left in Blackwater becomes a symbol of trapped history. Everyone talks about it as if returning for it might restore possibility. But no stash can undo the choices that made return impossible. In the secret villain reading, the buried truth about Dutch and Colm is another kind of Blackwater money. Hidden, dangerous, constantly shaping decisions from a distance. Arthur cannot retrieve it cleanly. Dutch cannot spend it into salvation. It sits behind the story, waiting, while people pretend the next job will solve what the last 20 years have broken. Cornwall adds a colder pressure because he represents the world that makes outlaw brotherhood feel romantic by comparison. Men like Cornwall destroy with law, contracts, guards, railroads, and hired detectives. Against him, Dutch can still sound righteous. Arthur can still feel that the gang stands for something warmer than the machine. That is why the secret hurts. The gang may be more human than Cornwall's empire, but humanity does not make it innocent. A campfire can be kinder than a boardroom and still hide lies that kill. The Pinkertons, especially Milton, would never care about Arthur's hidden moral history. To them, he is a criminal asset to corner or erase. That indifference matters because legal judgment and moral judgment are not the same. Milton can be right that the gang is dangerous and still be blind to the deeper tragedy. He can offer deals, threaten, and pursue without understanding the intimate wounds inside the camp. Arthur's redemption is invisible to the system hunting him. The law sees an outlaw dying. The soul knows a man trying to stop being the author of other people's cages. Eagle Fly's death, if it follows the known path, becomes one more warning about sons and fathers. He moves under the pressure of a father's grief, a people's suffering, and Dutch's manipulation. Arthur sees a young man pulled toward death by forces older than him. Perhaps he recognizes, with a different ache, the young version of himself pulled by Dutch's approval. The details differ, but the danger rhymes. A son shaped by a larger man's story, a life spent to serve a cause that cannot love him back properly. Rain's Fall's sorrow, after losing his son, would bring Arthur close to the grief he once helped create in Colm. Colm responded to a brother's death with revenge. Rain's Fall responds to a son's death with a grief that refuses to become meaningless cruelty, even when anger would be understandable. That contrast matters. It shows Arthur that pain does not force one path. His old excuse, hidden deep, may have been that everyone would have done the same under enough loss. Rain's Fall proves otherwise. Sorrow can be enormous and still resist becoming poison. The last rides through Roanoke Ridge would feel like moving through Arthur's own interior. The trees are tight, the sounds uncertain, the light often sickly. It is a landscape of ambush, rot, and narrowing routes. In that place, the secret he has carried no longer feels like something buried under old years. It feels present. Every argument in camp, every cough, every glance from Dutch, every sneer from Micah seems to say the past has reached the surface. Arthur's body is failing at the same time his old defenses fail. He can no longer outride either one. If he dreams, the dreams might not show Annabelle clearly. Guilt often refuses clarity. He might dream of a fire where Dutch and Colm laugh with their faces turned away. He tries to speak, but smoke fills his mouth. A woman walks beyond the light, and he knows he should warn her, but his feet are heavy. A man with Colm's eyes asks who changed the message. Arthur wakes coughing before he can answer. The dream need not be supernatural. It is the mind arranging what the waking man has avoided. The high honor path would be the most fitting for this alternate story, because it allows contrast without denial. High honor does not mean Arthur was always good. It means he begins choosing good when the cost is real and time is short. If the old secret is true, the sunrise ending gains a sharper ache. The light does not declare him innocent. It meets him after he has finally stopped protecting the lie that shaped him. That is why it can be peaceful without becoming easy. The low honor path would become a darker answer. If Arthur returns for money and dies in bitterness, the secret villain almost wins. The boy who feared losing Dutch becomes the dying man still drawn toward possession, revenge, and the material proof of a life spent taking. Micah killing him in that path would feel like the final triumph of the method Arthur never fully escaped. It is powerful, but it closes the circle in a colder way. The high honor path breaks the circle. The low honor path lets it tighten. Dutch's silence on the mountain remains one of the most devastating things, because silence is where Arthur's old sin lived. Dutch does not choose Arthur aloud. He does not choose Micah with full conviction either. He freezes inside the ruin of his own judgment. In this alternate reading, That silence becomes the mirror of Arthur's old withholding. Years before, Arthur delayed truth and let others bleed. Now Dutch withholds the simple human act of standing by the son who is telling the truth. The punishment is poetic, without needing to be neat. When Dutch walks away, Arthur may understand something terrible and freeing. He spent his youth trying to secure Dutch forever, and no amount of secrecy, loyalty, violence, or sacrifice could make Dutch stay when truth became inconvenient. The thing Arthur tried to possess was never possessible. Dutch's love was real in moments, but it was tangled with ego, need, and performance. Young Arthur broke lives trying to keep a fire that could not be held. Dying Arthur lets it go, and that release is the closest he comes to peace. Jon's escape down the mountain is the true opposite of the old crime. Arthur once narrowed Dutch's world so he could remain near the center. Now he widens Jon's world by removing himself from it. He sends Jon away from the camp, away from Dutch, away from the old names and old debts. The movement is simple. Go, be with your family, live. It has none of Dutch's grand language. That simplicity is part of its grace. Arthur has finally learned that love does not need to sound impressive to be true. The epilogue's quiet domestic labor becomes a kind of answer to everything young Arthur misunderstood. Building Beecher's hope is slow, awkward, and unglamorous. Fences, boards, nails, loans, chores, arguments, and apologies replace speeches around outlaw fires. Jon is imperfect and still often foolish, but he is trying to make a home where a child can sleep without learning the names of every enemy. Arthur's hidden crime helped turn friendship into feud. His final sacrifice helps turn flight into a house. The scale is smaller, and that is why it matters. Dutch appearing with Micah in 1907 would carry a final ghost of the old triangle. Once again, Dutch stands near a man who fed his worst instincts. Once again, another son figure arrives with a reckoning. But Arthur is not there to speak, accuse, or confess. His absence becomes part of the room. Jon acts because Arthur once saved him. Sadie acts from her own hard road. Charles acts with steady loyalty. Dutch shoots Micah, perhaps because some buried remnant of Arthur's final truth still moves in him. Then he leaves, as he always leaves, carrying more silence than explanation. If Jon ever found Arthur's partial confession, his response would define the afterlife of the secret. He might be angry. He might feel betrayed. He might remember Kieran, Sadie, and all the O'Driscoll blood with a new sickness. But Jon is not a philosopher of guilt. He is a man who knows what Arthur did at the end. He might decide that the dead cannot be made clean and cannot be questioned. He might fold the page, put it away, and build the fence anyway. That would not excuse Arthur. It would show how the living survive complicated love. Abigail, if she learned, might be less forgiving at first. She has always had a sharper sense for the cost of men's stories. She might say that every one of them had some noble reason, while women and children paid. She would be right. Her judgment would keep the ending from becoming too soft. Arthur's final mercy saved her family, but it did not give him ownership over absolution. Abigail's anger would protect the moral weight of the secret. Forgiveness, if it came, would be practical and limited, not glowing. Sadie might never know, which may be kinder. Her life is already bound to O'Driscoll violence through Jake. Giving her Arthur's old role in the chain might reopen a wound without offering repair. Yet, if she somehow learned, She might understand the difference between cause and choice better than anyone expects. Sadie knows what grief can make a person want. She also knows that wanting revenge and choosing what to do with it are not the same. She might hate Arthur for a while and still remember the man who helped her become more than a widow in a burned house. Charles would probably carry the secret most quietly. He might judge Arthur and still bury him with care. Charles understands that honoring the dead does not require lying about them. He could know Arthur did something terrible and still believe the final direction of his life mattered. That balanced view may be the closest thing to wisdom the story offers. People are not ledger books. A final good act does not erase an old evil, but an old evil does not make a final good act meaningless. Both have to be carried. The old Dutch Colm friendship, in the end, becomes a lost possibility rather than a paradise. Perhaps they would have betrayed each other anyway. Perhaps Colm's brutality and Dutch's vanity were always on a collision course. Perhaps Annabelle would have died by some other violence, and perhaps Arthur would have found another way to hurt what he feared losing. But tragedy does not need certainty to matter. The fact that things might have been different is enough. Arthur's secret villainy lives in that might have been, in the gap between inevitable doom and chosen harm. This is the deepest reason the premise works. It does not turn Arthur into Micah. Micah hurts people because it benefits him and because cruelty seems to please him. Arthur hurts people because fear convinces him that love must be defended like stolen money. That does not make him innocent. In some ways it makes him more frightening, because people who believe they are protecting love can do tremendous harm before they recognize the shape of their own hands. The story becomes less about hidden evil and more about corrupted devotion. It also makes Dutch and Arthur's bond more tragic, because both men are storytellers of different kinds. Dutch tells stories aloud until others live inside them. Arthur tells fewer stories, but in this version he silently edits the ones Dutch receives. Dutch is the preacher, Arthur is the shadowed scribe. Together, without admitting it, they build the world that later imprisons them. When Arthur finally tells the truth about Micah, he is refusing the old role. He stops being the editor of Dutch's comfort and becomes the witness Dutch cannot bear. From far away, the darker trail can look simple, almost like a campfire twist, meant to make a familiar legend heavier. But its strongest shape is not shock. It is a story about possessive love. A boy thinks love is a scarce resource. He fears being replaced. He protects his place with a small lie, then a larger one, then a silence that outlives the people it destroys. Years later, he meets the same pattern in Micah, and finally understands that love defended through manipulation becomes a cage. That is not a cartoon villain arc. It is a tragedy of a child who learned loyalty before he learned generosity. This version also deepens Dutch without excusing him. Dutch becomes a man who was manipulated by Arthur once and Micah later, but he is not innocent because he responds to manipulation through pride. Arthur's lies work only because Dutch wants certain things to be true. Micah's lies work for the same reason. Dutch wants to believe doubt is betrayal, that he is chosen, that his instincts are destiny, that people who challenge him are enemies. Arthur may light the first match in the Dutch-Colm feud, but Dutch carries enough oil in himself for the fire to spread. Colm becomes deeper too. He remains brutal, ruthless, and responsible for what he does. But the friendship with Dutch gives him a lost road. He might have become an enemy eventually anyway, but the speed and shape of that enemyhood were altered by Arthur's fear. Colm's brother becomes more than an unnamed casualty. Annabelle becomes more than a sacred victim. They become the two bodies around which a false history hardens. The feud becomes not inevitable fate, but a manufactured tragedy that everyone later mistakes for destiny. Arthur becomes darker, but also more interesting. His redemption no longer begins only with tuberculosis or the Downs family or Dutch's collapse. It begins as the reversal of a sin committed years before the story starts. He once destroyed a possible bond because he feared losing his own. At the end, he saves John by accepting that love sometimes means letting someone leave. That is the line that makes the whole premise worth writing. Secret villain Arthur is not redeemed because the secret did not matter. He is redeemed, partly, because his final choice moves in the opposite direction. The final tone should not be legalistic. No tally of blame can make this neat. Arthur is guilty. Dutch is guilty. Colm is guilty. The world is guilty. The century is guilty in its own cold way. But guilt is not evenly shaped. Arthur's first guilt is intimate and hidden. Dutch's is grand and self-excusing. Colm's is retaliatory and brutal. Micah's is hungry and shameless. Red Dead works because it lets these different moral textures grind against one another until no one can pretend violence is simple. In the last quiet image, imagine Arthur's journal after his death. Maybe there is no full confession, only a page torn out, or a line scratched so hard the paper nearly breaks. Something about Annabelle, something about Colm's brother, something about a boy being afraid. John never understands it, or maybe he does years later and decides not to speak it, because Arthur's final act mattered more to him than the full shape of Arthur's oldest sin. The dead leave fragments, the living decide what to carry. Maybe the truth is never found. That may be better. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is full of buried causes. Blackwater remains half hidden. Annabelle remains memory. Colm's brother remains unnamed. Arthur's son Isaac remains a wound in a few sentences. Not every truth becomes public. Some truths only change the soul that holds them. Arthur's secret villainy would be one of those truths, invisible to history, decisive to conscience. And as the fire gets low, the alternate story settles into its final shape. Dutch and Colm were friends once, and maybe that friendship could never have survived the world they chose. But it did not have to die the way it did. A young Arthur, terrified of losing the man who saved him, trims a truth, bends a message, lets suspicion grow, and stands too still when warning might have saved Annabelle. The lie becomes a feud. The feud becomes a way of life. The way of life becomes bodies in snow, cabins, fields, streets, and gallows. Then, years later, that same Arthur, older and dying, finally learns what love should have meant. Not possession, not secrecy, not keeping Dutch's eyes turned toward him. Love becomes helping John leave. Love becomes telling the truth about Micah even when Dutch refuses it. Love becomes giving Abigail and Jack a chance to wake up somewhere beyond the old campfire stories. Arthur cannot undo the friendship he destroyed. He cannot bring back Annabelle, Colm's brother, Kieran, Jake Adler, or all the nameless men swallowed by the feud. But he can stop adding to the lie. He can spend the last of himself in the opposite direction. So the story ends where Red Dead stories often end. Not clean, not fair, but human enough to hurt. Arthur Morgan was the secret villain of one old tragedy, and the broken hero of another. Dutch van der Linde was manipulated, but also willing to be manipulated by anything that made him feel larger than doubt. Colm O'Driscoll was wronged, then chose to become wrong in return. And somewhere in the silence between them all, the old friendship remains like a road grown over by weeds, a road no one living can ride back down. The night can rest there, with the horses quiet and the stars above the trees. In some other version of the past, Dutch and Colm might still be laughing by a fire, Annabelle might still be alive, Arthur might have learned that love grows larger when it is shared, and the O'Driscoll name might not sound like a curse in the snow. But in this darker trail, the boy who feared abandonment becomes the man who carries a family to its end. His last mercy does not erase his first betrayal. It only proves that even a life built around a hidden wound can turn, at the very end, toward the light it once tried to keep for itself.